This paper is, I think, I thought it was very important to be involved with it when I heard about it, because Statistics Canada has a continuing base of life satisfaction samples of about 50,000 a year that we've used for many purposes, and was able to operate a special purpose survey. I'll show you the surveys here. So the Canadian Community Health Survey is the base survey that's used, and the CPSS, the Community Canadian Perspectives Series, is slightly different. I'm going to give you just a moment on that differences, because we're getting a variety of information about how COVID-19 is affecting life satisfaction and a number of other indicators from different sources. So part of what I'll be asking your advice about is, well, two things. One, I'll want to have anything you can send me, this is for WHR use and other uses as well, on good measures before and during on a variety of indicators, including life satisfaction, because we're going to need all the evidence we can get, because, in part because it's not always consistent from one method or source to another. So this survey, the one was the CPSS, was still pretty big, 4,200, but way smaller, of course, than the 50K. And you'll notice it in the in the standard errors for the various totals, and it really matters to have a really big sample. They come from the same frame, but there's a slight mode difference. A computer-assisted telephone and in person is the CCHS standard method. The CPSS was an online-only survey, but it was properly recruited people out of the labor force survey sampling population. So they were able to get a very well-matched sample, as you could see. You could see on all the compositional characteristics without any requirements for reweighting. They are essentially drawing from the same population. So this is a quite highly consistent repeated cross-section with two potential differences. One is a mode difference. However, we are discovering, at least this is the early results from Gallup, when they've now switched from in-person to telephone communication for a good part of their surveys. They're finding some evidence that the telephone responders give higher answers. This is slightly different because we're taking telephone in the CCHS, and we've got online on the CPSS, and I'm not sure what that pairwise comparison is likely to do to method effects. The second thing that I'll caution you about is to think about contextual effects, not just where a question is in the survey, but what the survey is about. Because you'll remember that paper that, if anything, too much was made of by Angus Deaton, noting that in the Gallup US poll, answers were half a point or so lower if the question had been placed as it was accidentally below some questions about the political environment. When people were unhappy with the political environment, their answers to life satisfaction were systematically lower. We had also found prior to that time in the General Social Survey in Canada that with exactly the same question in the same survey base and with the life satisfaction put in the demographic block, same with all of them, so there wasn't a question positioning, that the actual topic of the survey made a difference to the answers in a systematic way in the following situation. That when put in a time use survey, answers were systematically lower for life satisfaction by about 1/3 of a point. when put in the criminal victimization survey, they were higher. The former one is clearly the case that people who are focused to think about their time competition or competition for their time then reframe their life in a less favorable way. In the victimization survey, it's a little more subtle, and we weren't sure until we had a second victimization survey that in fact we were seeing not just a one-off, but something that was specific to that topic. There, of course, people routinely think that they're more likely to be a victim than they have been, and their answers reflect that. And so they feel they've been lucky, and they correspondingly they haven't themselves been subject to what they think is general, and so they feel better off. I tell you that story because, of course, it's quite consistent with what I'll be telling you from ours and other research about COVID and its effects on life satisfaction. So you're prepared. Here's the decline in life satisfaction. Now this is looking at the individual answers, and the blue line is the 2018 Canadian Community Health Survey, and the black line is the June 2020 Perspective series. Well, you can see the average is lower by more than a full point, and as they report, I'm using a worked over version of the PowerPoint that Grant Schellenberg has used in showing these results within the Canadian Public Service. So it's not exactly the way I would have set it up, but it gives you things to read at the side, and you could see that at each point in the scale, there has been a big shift, and it's of course, given the sample sizes, it's very significant. Here is the first striking finding that is quite extraordinary to us. Well, I've been, as it were, giving you a little bit of a reason to think you may be suspicious of these results because they are not from precisely the same survey. They are from very tightly matched samples and quite equivalent methodologies. Because you see here that male and female responses were exactly the same in the CCHS and exactly the same in the 2020. And that can't be coming from a method effect, because it's true in both surveys. And of course, it does tell you that there's whatever it is that's making people give lower answers in the 2020 survey, they're giving them, it's applying equally to men and women. Those are simply no significant differences at all. And it isn't just the averages, and that's the reason we put it as with the full distribution. It's at every level of the scale. The male and female answers are equivalent, despite the fact, of course, as is well documented, that the kinds of changes in one's life that are going on under COVID are quite different by gender, and they're quite different by age, and they're quite different by income, they're quite different by education. So everybody's got their own story, and that story is very different. So heterogeneity in the response to your own life, to the life of others, is the norm. And so to find, in fact, that if you take across a major dividing line in terms of roles and so on, that the distribution is so unaffected is quite striking. And whether that'll carry forward in other results, I'll give you some hints later on. But then you say, oh, well, it means nothing's changing. But of course, things are changing. It was lower for everybody. So the question is our distributions is nothing different across subcategories here? Yes, it is quite different across subcategories in the case of age. So you see the U shape in age with the tiny standard errors in the CCHS, and then you see the big drop down in all age groups, but the drop down is more at the younger age than the middle we've put in those 95% whiskers, so you know how much confidence to place in that result. It's not dramatic, but it meets the standard confidence regions, and we'll just see whether the larger CCHS samples coming through later confirm this or not. It's not unlike what was discovered in the YouGov survey that we published results from earlier that showed the same equality of men and women and the same major drops among the young, with a slight hint there, less so here, of the drop among the young being greater for females than males. So there you go. The U shape is under COVID, not here. And now we've got something where we found that if you look on the left, those are the life satisfaction of people born in Canada and people who are born in 3 different regions of the world. And you can see they're essentially the same. And that's all the kind of thing you already know from the 2018 World Happiness Report that, or was it 2019, that immigrant well-being converges to that of the country they move to. And this is as true for Canada as we've shown for the UK as well. But COVID has not quite had the same effects for these are, everybody's down, of course. That's the same 1.4 points that everyone suffers, but it isn't quite the same 1.4 points. It's biggest for immigrants from Asia, and for all other regions, they're essentially not showing any bigger drop than for the Canadian born. So for two groups, it's significantly more, and especially those from Asia. And I'll get on a little more to talk about why we think that might be later on. So then what we did, and this is something we're also doing as we're approaching the Gallup whirlpool data for what we've done here is what we're doing with the Gallup whirlpool data. We're taking the 2017 to 2019 data file that's was used as a basis for the ranking of countries in the World Happiness Report, but it gives us a 3-year average. And then we've got the 2020 results, and we pool them. And then with or without common parameters, you then can find out how much COVID-19 has changed life satisfaction. Well, that's essentially what we're doing here. We're pooling the CCHS data for 2018 with the CPSS data for 2020, and then you could see each of these things. I'm going to have to kill your picture so I can look at the same thing that you're looking at. So then the CPSS, the CPSS variable is essentially a dummy variable that you might as well call COVID, because it's where 2020 differs from 2018. And in Model 1, that gives you not precisely the same number that we got just looking at simple means, but something pretty close to it. And then we have male, female. The males, in each case, we have a reference group, and which gets the dots, and then the female times CPSS is insignificant, of course, as you could see, you already have been told. Living alone is a big negative. Live alone times CPSS, and this is one of the things people talked about, that living alone is much harder. There, in fact, is no evidence in this survey that the disadvantage of living alone, which is a big one, is exaggerated in the context of COVID. Base case being living with others, children present. So you can see having children present is in fact a plus in these data relative to no children. But that has not changed under the COVID either. Now, education There is some evidence that there's a little twisting of effects by education in different surveys in different countries, but here none. The university degree is got a plus in the common pool, and the extra COVID effect is essentially zero. Now, urban rural, this is another one that's been held because at least in the first wave, the urban areas tended to be more hit than the rural areas. So we expect there might be something. Our base results are people are happy, all other things held constant in the rural ones. We argue that's mainly because of social context being tighter and warmer in the rural areas as you get a chance to know your neighbors more easily. Has that changed under COVID? No, not at all. Okay, so that's the first page of results. I've divided this into three, or Grant has, and the first one is, these are dogs that didn't bark. These are divisions of within the population where you might have thought there'd be differences in the effect to which their life satisfaction was influenced by COVID. And those were dogs that didn't bark. Here are the dogs that do bark. Come on, get it here. Next slide. All right, I'll try doing it this way. There we go. More than one way to skin a cat. So here we find, and this is a multivariate context within which we're considering those age results before. So that's just not because it's correlated with other things. When we have the full model, you find that indeed, if you use age 6, if you use the middle age group as the reference, there is a big drop of 0.4, 15 to 29 COVID effects relative to the middle age, and some increase for the 60 and older, smaller and not significant. So you can see that's something where the COVID effect is very much there. The next one is immigration. So essentially, these are just a multivariate presentation of what I showed you before. And it's the two regions have significantly positive effects, the Asian one and the USA and Europe one. All right, now here's where we try and, unfortunately, the CPSS did not have a full range of social context and employment information, so it's a little hard to do as full an analysis if you like, but we do have a not employed category, which normally, of course, drops down the life satisfaction in this set of data by more than 1/3 of a point. And then the effect on average life satisfaction here is not coming because there's an extra effect for being unemployed. You could see it isn't, in fact, it's slightly less effect, but not significantly so. So what's happening here is that the national unemployment rate rose by about 7 percentage points before COVID and by June 2020. And so we can compute that there was a reduction in average life satisfaction of about 0.02. So it's not huge, but it's of course highly significant, especially for those who are affected. Then we were looking for contextual effects. So we have a large number of economic regions in Canada. So there was enough variation in the unemployment rate across regions that we could look for a regional unemployment effect. And lots of work is, I'm watching the amount of time I've been using here. I've already poached some of the general conversation. I don't want to poach the discussion. So you'll find that that's a significant effect, not highly, but it translates to about a 0.4% decline, at 0.4 points decline in average life satisfaction. And together that gives about a third of the 1.4 points. Now, as I say, we don't have much social context, but we do have one question in the CPSS. People were asked, that question you read on the left, it's not ideal, but it gets you at something. And we did find that there was quite a difference in those fears across migrant groups. So 16% for the Canadian-born and higher for immigrants from Asia than anywhere else. When we broke that down, and we find that that is a highly significant coefficient, being fear of being a target of unwarranted behavior, and you can see the average life satisfaction is about 0.8 of a point different between those who felt themselves being fear of target of unwanted behavior. And that effect is about twice as prevalent for immigrants from Asia as for the population as a whole. Our immediate thought, of course, was that this was going to be among East Asians who were very largely represented in big communities all over Canada. And there was a view that came, especially in the international media, that this was a virus that was either born by Chinese, carried by Chinese, or sourced from China. And so there were some incidents of people being spoken to, keep out of my way sort of thing, harassment of East Asians. So we thought that might be the reason. We then looked in more detail about what parts of Asia this is true of, and it turns out the effect was at least as large for South Asians as for East Asians. And we're now having the view that this is for different reasons. I mean, in terms of the life satisfaction drop for South Asians and for East Asians. East Asians may have been subject of unwanted attention, but they've been uniquely low in COVID because, of course, they understood that the right way to deal with the risks was to keep physically distant because they were aware of what was happening in China. And so there's a region in Vancouver called Richmond, which is pretty well, and it's a large, highly integrated part of Greater Vancouver, but which is a dominant East Asian, and it has by far the lowest rates of COVID of any group, any geographic center in the province. So quite clearly, that's not a reason. They're not going to be more subject to COVID. They may be more subject to ill views. Alternatively, the South Asian group has now been uniquely highly represented in terms of COVID rates, so that South Surrey in British Columbia and a couple of parts of Toronto, which are dominant South Asian communities, have seen borne the brunt of the second wave. And in this context, it's in part due to all the extended families, there's a lot of returning Canadians coming back from India during the summer. Also, it's undoubtedly part of social gatherings and groupings and weddings that were going on. So that in itself, because it has been a big part of the second wave, is perhaps leading South Asians to be getting some negative response from others who think in some sense they are a vector of transmission. And in this case, it's the facts are probably more in line with that than they certainly weren't for the East Asians. All right. this is just saying StatCan, when we get this CCHS for the whole of 2020, which won't be till next year, it'll give us a much better look at this. And I won't guarantee the numbers will be the same next year, but they'll allow a better story. Now, I was looking for other evidence, and this is a way of appealing to you to please send me all you can about other people. I managed to get this from the people at the SOEP, and this is an interesting thing, which has got its echoes in some of our other data as well. Overall life satisfaction really not changing here, and this is now in their panel, so we know that there's nothing changing in method. Satisfaction with family life down, but satisfaction with sleep, interestingly enough, and satisfaction with health having risen significantly. In all cases, those are unusually great changes. Finally, this is just, I was just playing around with trying to find things with especially longitudinal studies or really match samples and methods from before and now, because clearly that matters. And these are studies from Dutch twins, from Mikey, showing small declines in their only measures of well-being. And in Oslo, secondary school, significant effect, almost as large as ours. But this is within the actual lockdown period. So some evidence of the effects being larger for the young. And all the other side of the street, so the older Swedes study showing life satisfaction and loneliness unchanged. And once again, self-rated health better. There's a lot of theory as to why that is, of course, that you're not sick and you've understood that the best possible life, it could be really awful, more awful than you thought it was, I mean, the worst possible life. And so you're lucky to be as well as you are. Just a hint at the bottom, we're finding from the first gallup whirlpool countries that the 2020 evaluations are very similar to the average before, while once again, other health problems, frequency of pain and general health problems showing up as being less prevalent.